All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. This is the first episode of what I hope will be many episodes, but we'll see. So, let's get started. So, today we are starting a new series that I was originally going to do like advanced web development, but I've decided that I want to try to start from scratch because there's a lot of tutorials out there that. Sorry, let me remove this redundant mirrored background. There's a lot of tutorials out there that I don't know, either start too far down the process or they skip too much or they hide a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes and they sort of like script it and perfect it, and then by the time you see it as someone trying to learn, you are kind of lost because it's like the context is too specific. So what I'm hoping to do is actually literally start from scratch and pretend that you have no, well, I won't even pretend. I'm just going to assume you have no programming experience. And by the time we get to the more advanced stuff, hopefully either you'll be ready for that or it'll appeal to more advanced users at any rate. So let's go. So the first thing you need to start coding, regardless of what you're going to make, we're going to focus on websites, web applications. And the first thing you've probably asked yourself in the past or are thinking now is, how do I even start? And the first thing you need is something to write code with. Now, you have stuff already on your machine. And I should mention that I'm using Windows right now. I don't actually like using Windows to program, but I don't have another machine right now. So until I get a Mac, I will be doing this on Windows. So you have, if you're using Windows or you're using Mac or Linux or anything, there are some basic text editors that already come with the operating system. And I would suggest you do not use these. I will elaborate on why that's the case. I mean, it's simple. It's kind of like, if you know, the reason you don't use Notepad to write a resume or other things that require more advanced, formatting and tools to help you, align text and such, et cetera. The same reason you don't use Notepad to write code. So there's lots of programs to write code with, and I'm just going to direct you to the one I like to use and is pretty popular, and that's called Visual Studio Code. And this is free. It's built by Microsoft. So if you go to the Visual Studio Code website, you're going to download for whatever platform you're running on. It works everywhere. And I'm on Windows, so I'm going to run this. I'm going to download this setup file. Even though I have some of the things I'm about to use installed already, I'm going to do it from scratch just because I don't want anything skipped or hidden or like problems I run into that you won't see and I just solve behind the scenes. I don't want any of that. This is no nonsense. So skip. You probably want these. And I would just leave that as default. Let's install this. Shouldn't take too long. Okay, cool. We're done. All right. Welcome to Visual Studio Code. The first thing that pops up is like release notes for the latest version. So in this case, I'm in September 2019. This is the last one they released. So that's what I see. So you can close that off. You can close this welcome tab if you want. And this is a pretty, there's two main types of editors for writing code. There's something called IDEs, or interactive development environments, which are usually cost money. They're usually like more feature filled and advanced. It's kind of like the Adobe Photoshop, of drawing. You could use some free drawing tools, but there's some like really heavy ones like Visual Studio, like the regular Visual Studio is an IDE. And there's other ones like, I don't even remember. Let's see. Coding IDEs. There they all are. Look at that. So there's quite a few of them. You're welcome to use anything you like, but I would suggest Visual Studio Code, which is technically not an IDE. It's technically an editor, although I guess you could argue either way at this point. But the difference is basically that one is kind of like lightweight and lets you pick the features you want, and sort of minimal out of the box, versus an IDE, a full-featured interactive development environment, which is like usually loaded full of stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is create a file. No matter what code language you're programming in, you pretty much always do it in files. You create a file just like you would create a Word document or an Excel file or a Photoshop image, PSD, whatever. You write code in files. So I've created this new file here. I haven't saved it yet. I'm just going to put something in it like hello world. And actually, I'm going to zoom in here and make this a little bigger. And the command for making it bigger is Control =. So I'm going to do that a couple times just to make sure the text is nice and clear. And I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save it as, let's create a new folder here. And I'm going to call this no nonsense coding stream. And I'm going to put it in a folder called episode 1. All right, so when we save this, what we save it as, the extension here, actually matters. Not like you can save it as anything to start and change it later, but I'm gonna save it as an HTML file, and we're gonna call it index.html. Index is let's unpack this a bit. First of all, we're gonna be building a website, and the main language for building a website is called HTML. It doesn't matter what it stands for, but it's hypertext markup language. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to call it index just because that's a convention that's been pretty widely adopted in at least the web world. And if you go to a website, like if I go to google.com, and if you don't type in like whatever, well, any website that has HTML files, if you don't type in like whatever.html, then it just defaults to index. So I don't know if Google actually has an index.html, but if they do, it would be the same page as google.com, but they don't, so that's fine. There's reasons why you don't have that anymore, but suffice to say, it's still fine to just have an index.html. So that's what I'm going to start with. And I've got this hello world text that I put in here, which, as you can see, there's no code yet. There's nothing special in here. But if I go to this folder now and I open this up, first you might notice that it has, it's been associated with Google Chrome, which is a web browser. You could open this file in any browser and it won't matter. But if I just double click it, it's going to ask me what I want to open it with. I'm going to say, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say Chrome. And what you're going to see is that we've opened this file, which links to my desktop, and it has my text in there. And this is technically a web page. It's not on the internet. You can't like browse to this yourself yet, but I can view it as if it was going to be on the internet. And in Chrome, well, in all browsers, when you open a file that's an HTML file, it's a slightly different protocol. Notice that Google.com, I don't know if it's even going to show it here, but like the full address for a real website is like HTTPS or HTTP, //www.google.com, and you'll notice that this is not the same as that because it's not actually on the internet yet. It's still just on my computer, just like a Word document or a PSD or anything like that. So the first thing you might notice is that even without any actual code, this file, if I just add stuff to it and I refresh here, notice that it's just updating. Like you don't actually need any actual code to run an HTML file or to view a web page. You might also notice that the spaces I put in there did nothing. So even though there's a bunch of like paragraphs empty lines I put in here, because I haven't actually put in real code, it doesn't know how to deal with that or show that correctly. So it's just like removing all that stuff because that's not how HTML well, this is how HTML works. If you don't specify how you want it to appear, you get this, it just like strips out everything and gives you the bare bones view of what you're looking at. If I right click on the page, I'm going to open this actually in another browser just to show you that this is not specific to Chrome. Open with I'll use Internet Explorer, and I don't use Internet Explorer ever, so this is the first time. But you can see that it's the same. We got the same result here, and I could open it with, I don't think I have anything else on this machine, but I could use Edge, which is like the new version of Internet Explorer. And you see we get the same thing everywhere. So this works, what I was about to do, this works in all the browsers, but I'm going to right click and I'm going to say view page source. And what you will see is the code I've literally put behind the scenes, which does have those empty lines in it, but when it's rendered, which is what it means to actually take the code I wrote and display it and process it and display it in a browser, you'll see that it looks different because the spaces in HTML just mean nothing. Okay, so let's start writing some actual HTML. And the way you start an HTML page, or using the hypertext markup language, is you open a what is this called? I don't know. A less than sign, I guess. And you'll see already that I have a list of options to put in here, but I'm just going to put the word HTML. And one thing that is cool about using an editor like this as opposed to Notepad is that it knows what HTML is, and it knows that when you're writing HTML, there's certain things it can do for you that make it easier to work with. And so it already added this second piece of code here that I didn't even do, because when you start a block of code in HTML, which is signified by these brackets and then some kind of element or node, and then you close the bracket, it knows that you should also, this is like opening, this is like starting code, and then you want a closing version of this tag to actually end the code that you're doing. So what I'm saying by HTML is I'm saying this is an HTML page. This is an HTML document. And every HTML document should have these two things: the word or the abbreviation, acronym HTML at the top, and another one at the bottom. And if I go to something like google.com and I right click and I view the source, there's a lot of junk in here that you don't have to worry about yet, but what you'll see is the very beginning is the HTML thing that I started, and down here at the bottom somewhere, don't worry about what all this is, you'll see the closing HTML tag. Okay, so this is like a universal thing you put in a file that is going to contain HTML code. You say start HTML and where does the HTML end? Here's my cold coffee. All right. So I'm gonna get rid of this. Another thing you might notice here is that the color is different. So, and actually even they even have these nice tooltips where if you just hover over the code you've written, it actually tells you what it is and provides you a link to the Mozilla Developer Network, which is a very handy reference site for, I'll just click on this and go to it. It's a very handy, one of the industry leading reference sites for coding, basically for coding on the web. So this tells you about what the HTML thing I just wrote. So there's some more stuff in here that we don't have. So let's talk about these things because these are important. Okay, so the first thing is this doc type HTML. This is a this is like meta code, I guess. I don't even know how you describe this, but this is just telling anything that reads this file that, hey, this is you should expect to find HTML document. This should be an HTML document. That's what you should be expecting to see if you're processing this. This is not for people. This is for machines. Okay, so I'm going to copy actually all of this, and I'm going to replace what I have in here with what they have. And actually, it so happens that this is the standard structure of an HTML page. You have you declare what your document type is going to be. You open your HTML tag, and you, in this case, supply a language option or attribute. This is known as an attribute. So this is a tag, right? HTML, this is a tag. And on top of a tag, you can apply attributes or properties or options, whatever you want to call it. I think officially they're called attributes. But what we're saying here is that the language of this page is English. And these sort of, like this won't do anything if I put like French here. And I put, just to show you, hello world. And I refresh this. It's not like it changes it to French or anything like that. But what happens is that when things are processing this, like accessibility tools, so like if you can't see, people use what's called a screen reader, and that will read off the language or the content of the page for you. So these types of things here really are for the programs to know what's going on, even though the user of this, like someone browsing this page, has no visibility to that thing that's in there. But it's telling the program that it should expect to see French content. So I'm going to change that back to English because that's what we're writing in right now. And actually, if you go to Google again and I view the page source, you should see the language. Yep. So they've gotten more specific here. This is called a culture code or language code. And if you look this up, language codes, you will see there's an international standard for specifying what language you should expect the page to be in. And you can use different variations of this. So for example, there's English Canada, which is where I am. There's also like English US, which would be American English, which of course is very similar, but it gets more interesting when you do like French Canada versus French, France. I actually don't even know the France country code, but it's probably in here somewhere. France. No, it's actually not. Oh, they don't have the country codes in here. That's why. Okay. But at any rate, that's what it is. It's the language and the country code. So Google's got English CA here. If I switch to French, so now I'm on the French page, and if I view the source of the French page, here is the French Canada language that it's indicating. And you can see there's other stuff here that, like, really don't worry about that stuff. It's not necessary. None of this is actually necessary. It's just helpful. The more information you add for the programs that are reading your code, the better it tends to be for the users. Okay, so I'm flipping back to English here. I got two of these open for some reason. I'm going to close it. All right, so there's another section here called the head. And just like in a normal document, you have a header usually, like even like a letter, you have a header, and then you have the body. And in this case, the head or the header, signified by the head tag, is just a, I don't say just, it's a piece of the page in the code that tells the browser different things about your page. So a really simple example, if you see here that this tab says Google, and this tab says index.html, because I haven't told it what the name of this page is. So if I look at Google again, I'm going to see in here that there's going to be a title, and this title is in the head and it says Google. So that's why this tab says Google. So if I go back to my code and I put a title and I say no nonsense coding tutorial, and then I go back to my page and I refresh, you'll see that now the title is no nonsense coding tutorial. So that is one of the things that goes in the header of a document, and it's one of the things that doesn't actually show up in the content of your page, but it's important for things like this, things like the browser to know what it's looking at. And actually even the icon here, you can see that Google has their Google logo, and we have just like a generic empty image or icon here. And this is called a Fav Icon. And so if I look at Google source once again, and I look for Fav Icon, well, they don't have it in here, but that's okay. That's because we'll talk about why that is in a moment. Well, let's talk about why that is now. Actually, that could get too complicated. Yeah, let's not do that right now. But just suffice to say that if you wanted a different icon for your page, you'd put Fav. I actually don't even know why this isn't showing up. Maybe I've forgotten. Fav Icon. Oh, okay. That's because it's not called Fav Icon. It's just, let's see if we can find that. Link rel equals icon. Nope. Okay. It's fine. Don't worry about that. But anyways, that's what this is called. This is called a Fav Icon or an icon. All right. So that's another thing that goes in the head. All right. Now, let's start doing some real stuff. And just for the sake of somewhere to start, let's just build this page here. Okay. Now, let's erase this. And let's, in here, put Google.com. Oops. Sorry, it doesn't say Google.com, it just says Google. That's the title. But we're going to call it, yeah, I'll just call it My Google so that we don't get confused with the real Google. So here's Google, here's my Google. All right, what's the first thing you see on this page? Probably the icon, the logo is the first thing you see, but what's actually the first thing, if you start at the top and start reading down left to right, is this link here to About. So if I click on this, see that it brings me to another page, and this is the About Google page. So let's put that on the page. And the actual code for your page goes in the body. So if I write the word about and I refresh my browser, you will see that the word about appears. I'm actually going to just reconfigure this a little bit. I'm going to put this over here. And I'm going to put this over here so that I don't have to keep flipping around. All right, so there's About and there's Store. And there's Gmail, images, this other thing here, and my picture. So I'm gonna skip that part for now. No, actually, let's put that in. All right. So there's about, start, Gmail, and images. There's a image here for link to all the Google apps, and then there's my picture as well. So we're gonna skip those just to start, because I just want to first even talk about like how we even get these to look the way they look in the Google side. So if I put those in and I refresh my page, you'll see that of course they all just sit beside each other. They don't actually look or do anything yet. You can't click on them. They don't look correct. They don't have the underline when I hover over them, etc., etc. So how do we do that? So these are called links. And the way you describe a link in HTML code is with what's called an anchor element. And an anchor element is A for anchor. So if I open up an A and I put the word about inside this, what you should see is that nothing will happen yet, and I'll show you why in a minute. But at least if I view the source of this, you'll see that my code is in there wrapping this about. And the reason it doesn't look like a link yet is because there actually isn't anything to link to, so the browser doesn't even bother making this clickable. So if we want it to be clickable, we have to actually make it a link. And the way you make it a link is you say href equals, and then this is your link. So I'm going to copy Google's link. I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to get rid of all this other crap. So their about page is basically this. So what I'm saying here is, I'll make this a little bit smaller. I'm saying here's a link, and the link href, I don't even remember what this, hyperlink reference, okay. But at any rate, href just means what is this link to? So I put in a value here, and now if I save this and I refresh my page, you see that this is in fact now clickable. And if I click it, it's going to bring me to the page I put in here. And actually this looks a little different because Google like redirects you around to, but whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that you could copy this, you could go to a new tab, you could put that in, and you're going to get the same page. So that is a link. This value is called a URL, or Universal Resource Locator. Again, doesn't matter what it stands for, it's just an address. So it's a unique address for this particular document. So that's about, and let's grab store, copy the link to store, and let's just see where this goes. Let's clean up all this crap. This is all like extra marketing stuff. So really it's just store.google.com. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put href equals the store link. And again, I haven't put the word store inside of this yet. So if I refresh here, it's actually not a link. I have to move the thing I want to be the link inside of the opening and the closing tag. So now it's a link. And if I click this, it goes to the store. Another thing about links, you might have noticed that when I click this, it actually overwrites the page I'm on to bring me to this URL. So I lose my page. If you don't want that to happen, you can add another attribute here called target. And if you say target equals think, well, actually, if you look this up, one of the nice things about Visual Studio Code is you can hover over this thing and it tells you like some of your options. So I'm going to use the word blank with the underscore in front. Oops. And that tells the browser that when I click on this, I'm going to make this a bit bigger and this a bit smaller. When I click on this, I'm going to save and refresh. I want it to go to like a blank tab or blank window. I don't want it to overwrite the current one. So you can see that what it did is I'll do it again. It opened a new tab instead of overtaking my current tab. And there's a bunch of different options for this value, but blank is one of the more common ones. So I'm gonna take that out because we're trying to actually like recreate Google. So again, this doesn't change the aesthetic of it, but it does change the behavior, which is when I actually click on that. So there's two more here. There's Gmail and images. So let's copy what we did for store, and I'm gonna erase what I did here. I'm gonna copy this twice. And I don't know what these links are yet, so I'm gonna just get rid of this. And this was Gmail and images. So let's go back to Google and see where those go. So let's copy this link. mail.google.com. And images, probably images.google.com, but we'll see. Google.com, image, something, blah, 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 blah. All right, now let's refresh our page, and we've got two new links here. And I guess one of the first things you'll notice is that there are different colors, and that is a default behavior. When you visited a link, you get a certain color, and when you have not visited a link, you get a different color. So that is a built-in feature that you obviously, I didn't code that, I didn't program that to happen. That's just happening by default. There is ways to control that, which we'll get to, but for now, that's just like, you notice even the fact that it's blue, I didn't make it blue. I didn't tell it anywhere in here to be blue. That's just the default color for a link. Now, the next thing we'll add in, I know this just doesn't look correct yet. Some are on the right, some are on the left. We're going to ignore these two for now because you'll see why. But the next thing we need is the logo here. So so this is an image. And the way you add an image to a page is you use the image tag, so img. And when you give it an image, you need to tell it just like when you have a link, you need to tell it where the link goes. When you have an image, you need to tell it where the image should come from, and that's the source. That's src. Oops, equals. So I'm going to leave this blank for a moment. I'm going to actually copy this, copy image address, and I'm going to paste it in here so you can see this is a link to, if I just put this in a browser, you get the image itself by itself, because that's what this is. So I'm going to put that image link as the source for my image that I'm putting in here. And you should see that show up. Helps if I save it. Right, so now we have our, by the way, I'm over here, I'm hitting Control S to save, and then here I'm hitting Control R to refresh, or if I'm not clicking that refresh button. So you can see that we have our image in there. Of course, it doesn't, it's not aligned properly and everything, but that's fine, we're going to do that later. Also, there's another important property or attribute of images that you should always include, and that's called the alternative text, or alt. And the reason you include this is because if you have a user that's visually impaired, they can't see an image. So the browser and the screen reading software that they're using has to know how to describe this image to the person, and that's what they use the alternative text for. So in this case, I would say Google logo, and that way, if someone's browsing this and they're visually impaired and they're using something that reads the page out to them, it's going to read that there's an image here called Google logo, and it won't just say, oh, we don't know what this is. And similarly, if the image can't display for some reason, so I'm going to just break this URL by adding invalid, like this is just not a valid URL. So I'm going to save this, I'm going to refresh. You see that the image here is now broken, but it's showing me the alternative text. So worst case, at least your users know what they should be seeing. And if I took this out, you would see that you just get a broken image, and that's not helpful for anybody. No one knows what that's supposed to be. So alternative text is like really, really important. And there's a modern guideline for accessibility that all websites have to follow. And that's a very good thing. And one of the things they enforce is alternative text for images for that very reason. So I'm going to fix, just remove the extra characters I put in there so it comes back. All right, good. So now we've got our image. We got some links. So we're getting closer. The next thing is the actual search text box here. This is called an input. In this case, it's a text box. So how do you make one of those appear? Well, you put an input, and you say the input type is going to be text. I should probably mention at this point, I'm going to make this a bit smaller again because I can't fit it all on the screen. If you'll notice that links, for example, have an opening tag, some stuff in between, and then a closing tag. Well, images don't actually need that because certain elements don't need that because there's nothing that goes in between the declaration of this element. So this is called a self-enclosing tag, where you just, instead of putting like /image like this, and for no reason because there's nothing that actually goes in here, you just, sorry, that's what it would look like if there was a reason to do this, but there's no reason to do this. So you just do what's called self-enclosing, and you just close the opening tag like that. And inputs are another one of those things that are self-enclosing. You don't need to actually put anything in between the tags. Okay, so you can see that there's a text box here, and I can type in it, and it doesn't do anything right now, but it's the same element that we have here. Same type of element. All right. So that's our text box, and then we've got these two. Again, there's some aesthetic things here that I realize I'm not including yet. We're gonna get to that later. But the next elements are buttons. These are called buttons. And because buttons have text inside of them, you can actually write text. So if I say Google search, which is the first button, and I go over to my thing and I refresh, you'll see a button show up here, and it has the text Google search. Of course, this doesn't do anything yet, but it is a button element, just like this is a button element. And the other button they have is I'm feeling lucky, so I'm going to copy what I did here, and I'm going to say I'm feeling lucky. So now we have our two buttons. I will put this text as well. And actually, this is a good place to introduce a new element. Notice that like this isn't anything except just text. Like you can't interact with this. Like this is a link here, but this text here is just sitting here. It's not doing anything. And that generally, well, that can be done like a billion different ways, but generally you're supposed to represent that as what's called a paragraph or a P. And a paragraph is just generic text. So I'm gonna write, well, I'm not gonna bother writing this. I'm just gonna copy what they've got here. There's a period here. Okay, so now we've got our paragraph, and there's a link, which I'm just gonna copy again, one of my previous links, put it in here, and copy the source. Where does this go? Copy link address. There's a whole bunch of crap in this URL that you don't need. Let's go to this link first and see what, yeah, so google.ca/travel. All right, so that's where it goes. And they have the words get started. Get started. Okay, so I'm going to show you something about paragraphs right now. This link you'll see is obviously in the same paragraph as the text. So if I just take this and I move it inside of the P, the paragraph, I put it here, you'll notice that it's now in the same paragraph, because one of the things a paragraph tag does by default is it adds some spacing around it. Again, we can modify this later, but just to show you again, if you take this and you put it outside of the P, it ends up being spaced down below because it's not part of that paragraph. If I put it back in the P, now it's inside. Not sure why this isn't aligning here. It's kind of annoying. And actually, you know what? Let's solve this problem. The fact that this is messy and not aligning very well. We could do it ourselves. Like we could, you know, put spaces and align it all fancy and everything. But we don't need to do that because there's programs that do it for us. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code and I go to, this icon here, which is extensions, there is an extension called Prettier, which I highly recommend you get. So it's the first one here, Prettier code formatter. Let's install this. Not really sure why it's taking so long. All right, looks like it's done now. Okay, now if I go to preferences, extensions, and I go to the settings here, I want it to automatically format, clean up my code when I click save. So I'm gonna actually, because I just installed this, I'm gonna close this file and I'm gonna reopen it. Oops. Open file, index. Okay, now if I, let's see if this works out of the box. It does not. Okay. If I say Command Shift P, this brings up a whole bunch of options of things you can do in Visual Studio Code. That's Control Shift P. I'm used to Mac. And you type in prettier. I don't know why this isn't showing up. Maybe I need to restart. I'm gonna close Visual Studio Code and reopen it. And this, by the way, is why I'm doing this from scratch, so that you don't run into this problem and then not know how to fix it. Prettier. Nope, that's still not a command. All right, let's figure out what's going on here. Settings. Prettier. Actually not sure why this isn't running. Well, actually, let's go to... Oh, I see. Because the command is actually not a specific command to prettier. It's just format. It's just a generic format document command. Okay, cool. Format on save. Yeah, all right, this is what I want. So if I go into my preferences, format on save. And I don't have to do anything here. I just close this now. Now let's try. There we go. All right, cool. All right, so just to reiterate here, I just installed a formatting tool called Prettier. And what that does is if I just mess this up and put this in like a random gross format, and then I hit save, it actually cleans it up for me as best it can. So it actually can't remove like line breaks and stuff for you, but it's smart enough to know what is HTML code and how it can be formatted, so it keeps it all nice and tidy for you. So now I never have to format anything again while I'm writing. I could just type. So if I put in like another paragraph here, and I type some text, and you know, if this doesn't align and I hit save, it just tidies it up for me. All right. So that is something I would highly recommend you do, because from experience, I've seen that developers who don't take this seriously end up with pretty messy looking files. And we haven't even done much here, but as you can see, like it's already getting like kind of hard to read, you know, for a person. So you really want to keep your code clean and formatted properly. And not having to worry about that yourself is a big deal. It's a big cognitive load. Like writing code is hard enough, so you don't need to also worry about what it looks like and how many spaces you indented by and stuff like that. Okay, so formatting. Another thing that's important about writing code in an editor like this is what's called syntax highlighting. So you'll notice that, for example, these tags are in blue text and the stuff inside of them is white text. And even like links, like these strings that I've put in here as links are orange. That's called syntax highlighting, and that means that the editor knows what code I'm writing. It knows how to read that syntax, and it knows how to visually display differences to me between different types of elements. So if I open this in Notepad just to show you what it would look like, you'll see here that like which one is more readable. I mean, it's not even a competition. Like there's no way really to see, like if I did this and I screwed up this syntax and I got rid of that bracket, so now this is actually like broken and you'd have no idea. But here you'll see that it's actually like already complaining. I haven't done anything. I haven't even saved the file. It's already like something's wrong, right? You have this dark red down here because it's like it can't quite interpret what's going on anymore. So and in fact, if I did save this and I reloaded my page, I'd get some different results here because the code, the syntax for my link is actually broken. So the about link is gone because it doesn't even know like how to show that anymore. So syntax highlighting is not just like a nice thing to have. It's actually really, really important for just productivity and like understanding what you're actually writing. So if I refresh now after I fixed it, it's back, it's saved. All right. So syntax highlighting and code formatting, super, super important no matter what type of code you're writing. All right, cool. So let's go back to Google. And a lot of this stuff is just repeated, the same type of elements we already did. So we're gonna ignore that for now. And I'm just gonna talk about like styling and how we actually get this to look a little more like Google looks. So in on the web, you have HTML, which represents the code you write to define the content that shows up on your page. And you have another language called CSS. I'm actually write this in a new document, so this is just going to be notes. So there's HTML, which is hypertext markup language, which sounds like super fancy, but all it means is a markup language is essentially like a code. That's it. And hypertext is the particular type of code that was created for the web. And it really doesn't mean anything special. So HTML is how you describe the structure of your page. And the other main, well, there's three of them, but the main language for styling is called CSS, which is cascading style sheets. Style sheets? I don't know, something like that. Style sheets. I don't know if that's one word or not, but that's what it stands for, which again is kind of like super ambiguous and doesn't really mean anything to the average person. So let's just talk about what this actually means. So, and this is for styling your markup. Actually, styling your markup doesn't make sense. We're not styling the markup. We're styling how the markup is rendered. And rendered, of course, means how it shows up on the page the user is looking at, not the page you're looking at. Okay, so there's a billion different ways to do like everything on the web, but if you were to ignore all that and you just wanted to get started, one of the ways you could do that. So let's say the first thing we want to style is we don't want an underline under this text by default, this link. We want our links to be like Google's, where when you hover over it, you get an underline. And actually, I think the color changes a little bit. We'll take a look at that in a sec. And when it's inactive, then it's got nothing, and when it's being hovered on, it's got an underline, and it's like indicating to you that you can click on this, versus this type of text here, which you can hover on and nothing happens. The word markup is the same as tags. Yeah, that's fair. I don't really want to get stuck on the nomenclature, but yeah, it's elements, tags, nodes, markup, whatever. All right, so right, we want this to not have an underline by default, and actually it's not blue either. So if we want to see what this the style of this particular element is, I'm gonna just make this bigger again. We can right click on it, and I think every modern browser has this now, and you can say inspect. And when you say inspect, you get a whole bunch of crap that shows up, which is super confusing at first, but let's just talk about what we care about here. So when we did that, this is called the developer tools panel, and it's for developers. And you can see that what it's done is it's opened up the page for us, and it's found the element we're interested in, and it's showing us some properties on the side here of what makes up this element. And you'll see that they're all broken up here in a whole bunch of different categories. And that is the way it was programmed. But if you go to computed, what you get is just the end result. So if you want to know like what color this is, for example, you can see here that there is a whole bunch of different colors, and you say, well, I don't know which one's actually being used. Well, the final answer is this, and this is called an RGB declaration, but this is just black. So the end result is that this color is black. And again, HTML lets you declare colors different ways. But let's talk about how we actually want to style our links. So with CSS, the way you start writing CSS, well, there's many ways to do it, but one of the initial ways you would start doing it is you would actually put it in the header of your document, and you would say that in this header, I'm going to define some styles for the stuff that comes later. And how do you define styles? Well, let's say we want to say that links, the color, these are actual style properties, by the way. This is not like interpreted differently. These are real properties. So this is really a style property called color. So if we wanted to say, I want all my links to be black, then you put the tag in your style, and then you would put, why is it complaining about this? Do not use that. Yeah, it's because I'm putting it here. And you would say, I want the color to be black. Now, you can Yeah, so you can declare colors a bunch of different ways. Actually, you can notice here that Visual Studio Code out of the box also gives you this color, like it shows you the color. So if I put pink, oops, it's like smart enough to know that this is a color, and it's going to show you the preview of what that color is. So if I did RGB 000, which stands for red, green, blue, it's the same as it's the same as saying black. It's also the same as another way you can do it is called a hex code. So let's just bring this up. CSS colors. These are hex codes, and this is actually the primary way of doing it on the internet. You don't have to do it any one particular way. You can mix it up, but you'll see that every color has a code defined. So if I just copied this color here, or this code here, and I go back and I say that, you can see that it knows what that is too. It's this like blue teal color, okay? So we're gonna copy Google though. We want it to be black, and we'll declare it the way they declared it, just because why not? Let's just do it the way they did it, so we get it exact. So that's how they've done it. RGB 000. RGB again stands for red, green, blue, and if you go to there's a whole bunch of tools and stuff that. Basically, they generate the RGB value for you, right? So what the red, green, and blues are supposed to be. But black is 000 because you've got no red, no green, and no blue. If you wanted all red, then you'd use this code here. 255 as the first value. Again, this is not something you have to memorize or know. You'll remember some of these as you go along, but you can see now that indicates red. But we want black, so we're gonna leave it here. And what I'm saying here is that everything down here that is an anchor element should have the color black, should be the color black. So now if I refresh my page, you'll see now that all of my links are black. Let's put this back over here. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we wanted to get rid of the underline. So the way you do that is a property called text decoration. And again, you don't have to remember this, but by default, links have a text decoration of underline. And what we want to do is not underline. So we actually want none. So now if I refresh, you'll see that all of my links, my anchor tags are now not decorated with an underline. Some other things, just for demonstration purposes, if you wanted them to be, I don't know, spaced out more, like text, letter spacing, you could say like 5 pixels, and this will put 5 pixels of space in between every letter. Oops. So obviously that looks terrible, but just to give you an idea, that's you can do. This is how you style things. You literally just say, what do I want to do? What do I want to target? And in this case, I'm targeting every single anchor on this page, and then what properties indicated by these brackets. Everything in between there is describing what that's going to look like. So let me get rid of that spacing. And of course, by default, since I didn't, if you don't put anything, there are some default styles, like in this case, Chrome makes them blue and underlined. So now they're black and they're not underlined. So what we do want to do though is we want to make them underlined when I interact with them. And in this case, the interaction that we want is called a hover. And again, if I go back here to actual Google, and it's already got it open, but I'll just re-inspect anyways. There is a uh, this is called, well, this is called a, like a pseudo state for this element. And if I click this, it lets me see the different types of states. So one of them is hover. So you see if I click this, it actually changes, of course no one else sees this but me, because this is my like local rendered version of Google. But you'll see that you can you can use these tools to see what your program will do if you define that state. So when I hit this, I'm saying, I want you to show me what it looks like if someone was hovering on it. And what you see here is that activates this rule down here. So I'll remove it again so you can see. So when I say now hover on this, it actually shows up now that there's this other rule that Google's got declared in their code that says, hey, when someone hovers on this, underline it. Right? So you can see that the text decoration, this is like, I use the shorthand, there's more specific properties, line, style, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to do underline. Or underline is what is actually being rendered here. And if I remove this, then you'll see that it's got none, which is what we have set as well. So let's do that. So I want to say that when someone hovers over a link, I want the text decoration, to be underlined. So this is one of the ways you write CSS. You say, hey, this is how I want you to style all my anchor tags by default, and this is how I want you to style an anchor tag that has been hovered on. And there's only a few of these. So even though this might seem like it could go on forever, there's actually only a few: hover, visited, active, focus, focus within. I didn't even know about this one, but these are the only 4, I believe, element states that are built into CSS. So now if I refresh and I hover, you will see that I actually get my underline. Right? Cool. So let's keep going. What else is different about this? Well, it looks like the actual font is different. So this is like a default font because I haven't declared any special font here. And over here, they have a different font. So if I go to, oh, this keeps rendering terribly. If I go to compute it, there's a font family. That's what the value is called in CSS for defining what the family of font you want to be is. So if I do font family, and then I do Arial, same as Google, sans serif. So what this means is when you declare a font family, you can give it a list of fonts separated by a comma. And basically what that does is that it tries from left to right. It tries the first one, and if it doesn't render, it'll move on to the next one. And these are, whether or not you realize it, these are just built-in fonts to Windows, and actually they're built in everywhere, I think. So if I now save this and I refresh, so now you'll see that my links are now Arial font. The other stuff down here is not Arial font because I haven't yet told it what font to use for these, so it's using the default. And to demonstrate the list thing that I just mentioned, if I pick a font that I don't have on this computer, so let's say I think Helvetica, I don't have. So even though I might have, let's inspect, see what we get here. I might actually have Helvetica, some padded. Let's find a custom font I don't have. Custom fonts. Right, so here's a font called Cassandra. So I'm going to put Cassandra. I don't have this font on my machine. So it's just going to be, it's going to fall back to Arial. And if I didn't have Arial, it would just fall back to a basic sans serif font. So even if I erase these, you'll see that it's the same, because Arial is essentially the same as sans serif. Arial is like the default sans serif as far as I remember. If I put, what is it, Times New Roman. Oops, I didn't want to replace all that. Actually, the first thing you'll see there, if I go back to that, is that it put quotes around Times New Roman. And Times New Roman is a serif font, which means it has serifs. You'll have to look this up yourself if you want, but serifs are the little, like you see on this V, the little lines at the top of the V, and the G, the lines in the G, those are serifs. So sans serif, like Arial is a sans serif image, you'll see it does not have those lines. Times New Roman is a serif, which has those lines. So you can see now it looks like that. And the reason you have to put quotes around this is because the actual name of the font has spaces in it. So that's how you declare a font that has spaces in it. So if I put Times New Roman and then I fall back to Arial, sans serif, I have Times New Roman, so that's fine. But if I put like a mistake in here, like I don't have Times New Roman X, it should fall back to Arial, which it's done. So it doesn't know what this is because I just made that up, but so it falls back to the next one. And likewise, if I put Times New Roman after Arial as my fallback, you'll see that it's going to be Arial, but then if Arial is not available for whatever reason, or I spelt it wrong or something, you're going to get Times New Roman as the fallback. Okay, so that's how you declare fonts in CSS. What's next? Okay, so it looks like this is a bit smaller than mine. So let's see why. So my font is actually, I didn't specify a size. So what it's showing you here is just the properties that actually are modified by the code. But if I click this show all, now you're going to see every property, which is obviously there's quite a few of them. You don't have to remember them all. You can always reference them later. But yeah, that's what we're going to see here. The reason I did this is because there's a font size, which I didn't specify in my code, so it wasn't showing up in the list of properties that were modified. So the default is 16 pixels, which makes sense that mine would appear bigger because Google has declared theirs to be 13 pixels. So let's now put our font size to be 13 pixels. And now when I refresh, it's exactly the same as Google's. And you can see here that now it's showing us the font size because I actually modified it. It's not the default. All right, anything else that we're missing? Yes, so actually they have another property here. Ours is a little bit darker, which you may not be able to see. Let's see if we can make this clearer. So ours is a little bit darker because they have declared an opacity, which is just, well, it's how transparent or opaque the element is. I'm not really sure why they did this, but let's copy it. So they have opacity of 0.75, which means it's only 75% as opaque as it would normally be. So if I say opacity 0.75, now our font should get a little bit lighter. Yeah. And now you can see that it's exactly the same. So this is essentially now recreating Google's style for their links using just this code, which I got just by literally copying what they have here. So that's one of the cool things about the web. You can be like, how do they do that? You can literally go and inspect the element and you can look at it. Now, exactly what is causing it to look the way it looks. And I will be right back. All right. Seven Hero says, so you live now teaching others how to code. You live now from teaching. I don't make any money off this right now. I'm just doing it for fun. Because people have told me I'm pretty good at explaining things for normal non-tech people. So just going to do it for fun for now. Thanks, Eva. I've actually been on Twitch on a personal account for a while, just not doing coding. So this is just a brand new account I created today to start this stream. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm going to upload everything to YouTube after as well when I'm done. All right, cool. So we started styling our page, our Google. I'm going to put these back in the same window. I'm going to remove this. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of that. All right, so let's get this looking a little more like real Google. Because as you can see, even though we've kind of styled our links, they're still not like arranged correctly. So this is an ironic, kind of an ironic problem and kind of an ongoing joke is one of the hardest things to do in web development is actually laying things out on the page. And you might think that's silly, but web development has a very unique challenge that, as far as I know, no other programming, I don't know what the word is. The output of other programs, or even like a magazine or print, like if you were just to print this out, God, I don't know why it does that when I double click, but if I were to just print this out, it would always be the same. So if someone says, I want a poster where you've got some stuff in the top left, you got some stuff in the top right, you got some stuff in the middle and some stuff at the bottom, that's pretty easy because everyone sees the same poster. Or maybe you have, I don't know, 3 different sizes and they're all preset. But on the internet, and specifically nowadays where everyone's on different devices and screen sizes, you basically don't know what size your user is going to look at your page in. So even here, even though my monitor is a specific size, I don't even have to look at this page the full size of my monitor. So right now it's only, I don't know, whatever this is, 3/4 of the page or something. But the point is, like, I can literally do anything, and these things still have to kind of look the same. Well, they don't have to, but it's usually helpful that you don't move things around all over the place and confuse your users. So if I went to this page and I said, yeah, the about link is, or the about link's in the top left, if I send someone else to this page, they should also see the about link in the top left, and they should see, you know, the Google logo in the middle and this stuff all centered and everything nicely. And it's actually quite difficult to say, hey, I want this stuff to be in the right and I want this stuff to be in the left, because like if I went down really small, well, you could see Google actually makes this disappear, which we'll talk about soon. That's called responsive design, responsive styling. I actually, this is kind of a tricky thing to do. It's not as simple as you might expect. And that is because the size of people's screens is always different. Even vertically, right? Like I could be like this. So like now I don't even see the bottom of the page by default, whereas someone else would actually see the bottom of the page. So there's, as with everything, since the web's been around for, I don't know, 30 years or something, there's many ways to do this. But there's a, well, let's talk about some of those ways. So when you're, and this, by the way, is not going to be an in-depth guide on how to style things. I just want to demonstrate the differences between like layout and specific styling. So what we did before was we styled our specific elements to look a certain way, but we haven't laid them out in the correct way. So in order to lay stuff out, you essentially need, no, I'm not French, I'm English. I was born in Montreal, but I don't speak French anymore. You need new elements that are responsible for laying out your content. So for example, the about and the store links are in the top left, and the rest of these things are in the top right. So the way you do that is you don't generally say, I want this about to be exactly here and this store to be exactly here. You do it relative to certain anchor points. So what you can say is like, I want an element to be in this top left that just contains these links for me. So I don't need to style both of these and tell them to both be up here. I can just put another element up here, and I can just say, hey, put everything inside that element in a normal way, but I'm going to move that element itself to the top left. So the element you generally use, you can use pretty much any element, but the element you generally use is called a div, and I actually don't even know what that stands for. I assume divider. The div element has no special meaning at all. Yeah, so what I call it divider. And that just means it divides the content between elements. So I'm going to put the about and store inside a div. And again, my formatting is messed up here. I'm going to hit save, and it's going to clean it up for me. This is one of the reasons you need Prettier, because it's like, why should I have to worry about that? Okay, so I put these two things in their own divider. And now I need to tell it, hey, where are these going to go? So if I just refresh the page, you already see that they're now separated from other things. Even though there's no like special styling here, they're different than what they were before. So if I take that out again, and I hit save and refresh, so everything goes back together in the same chunk. But now if I put that back, Now they're on their own. They're divided. All right. So how do we? Well, in fact, we don't even need to worry about how we're going to do this yet. But let's just say that we want these to be a certain way. We want the Gmail and images links to be on the right, so they're going to be in a different spot as well. So let's put those two inside this divider here. The logo will be on its own down here, which we could put in another divider, but we don't need to yet. And then all this stuff is also going to be in its own spots. So let's put, yeah, I'm gonna do this the way I would do it if I was really coding this. So let's put the image in its own divider. I'm gonna put the text box in its own divider. I'm gonna put the search buttons in their own divider. And these are actually, this part here, even though it's separate, I don't need to put it in a divider because a paragraph element also is one way of dividing. It's kind of confusing, like why you need all these different elements. But let's just say that divs are generic dividers, so you can put like anything inside a div, and these specific elements are not really meant to do that. So you're not, like, you really shouldn't have paragraphs on your page just to align something. A paragraph should be used for a paragraph of text and maybe some other stuff. Okay, so now I've got these things divided up, and again, it doesn't matter how many spaces I put here. I just do this for clarity, so you can see, I can see how I've divided up the content. And actually, this set here is kind of already in a spot that's acceptable. It's at the top left. And these two we want to move for sure over to the right. So again, I'm not going to do a very, like, this isn't about like how to style things necessarily, but I just want to cover how you would, one of the ways you could do this. So if I want to, I can't just say div like I did with anchors. I can't just say, hey, take all my dividers and do this to them, because I don't want to do the same thing to all these. I only want this set here should be right aligned. So I don't want to target everything. I want to target specifically this set here. So how do I do that? Well, there's different ways to do that, but the simplest, quickest, most foolproof way of doing it is to assign an ID to this divider. So this can be anything. Let's call it right header links. So now I'm saying this is a divider, and it's a unique identifier is the ID right header links. So instead of targeting an element, now I'm going to target something by the identifier. And the way you do that is with a hash symbol. And then you put the name of it, right header links. So now what I'm saying is I'm going to target specifically that divider, and I want it to be aligned to the right. Now you would think that it would be some kind of like simple thing like text align right. But it's not quite that simple. This does work, but this only aligns text within the parent divider. So it's only going to right align this text inside of this divider. But this looks like it works, and it kind of does. But it's just because this divider, if I inspect it, it takes up the whole page. So what happens is that the text inside of it gets right aligned to the right side of the page because this divider takes up the whole page. The problem, and the reason you can't just do this super easy, is you'll notice that if it takes up the whole page, that means it can't be on the same line as the other two links on the left. So you've got this they're not on the same line, whereas here they are definitely on the same line. So how do you solve that? Well, again, there's a billion different ways to do this. But what you need to do at the very least is say, well, okay, I want this to be right aligned and I want this to be left aligned, but I don't want these taking up the entire full width of the page, because then they can't be on the same line. So if I were to do this correctly, I would have to put another div, and I would say I would have to identify the left ones, even though they looked fine. I'd say left header links, and I'm gonna copy this and just say left. So if I just refresh now, they're both going to be right. That's fine. So if I put this back to left, which by the way is the default, then it goes back to where it was. So that's why you don't need to specify like defaults, because it's redundant. But what I do need to do is I say, well, I don't want this left header links divider to take up the whole page. So instead of being the full width, I'm gonna say let's only take up half the page. So 50% width. And let's see what happens. So now if I hover over this, you'll see that the content now, the actual divider takes up the full width of the page. Well, it doesn't technically. The blue part is the divider. It takes up half of the screen. And if I do the same for this one here, you'll see now that this takes up half the screen, and the text is still right aligned, but now it's right aligned to only 50% of the screen instead of 100% of the screen. And you will still notice that this still doesn't work, which is why I was laughing when I first introduced this concept, is because it's surprisingly difficult to align items with CSS code. So there's lots of ways to do this, but what we're going to do is I'm going to use something called Flexbox, which is a fairly recent concept thing that you can now do, and it was actually created to try and solve this problem of aligning things on the internet in websites. And the reason it's called Flexbox is because it's meant to support the flexible resolutions and the viewports that I mentioned earlier that everyone has on the internet. Because I could do something like this if I really wanted to do. I could say, I don't need to do anything for the left, but if I wanted to do this one, I could say, width 50%. So I'm going to say position this absolute. Again, you don't have to remember what all these literally mean. But if I said, I want it to be absolutely positioned and I want it to be at the far right of the screen, I'm going to say, okay, position it to the right at 0, at the coordinate 0. And this will move it awkwardly, because when you change how something is positioned, it actually affects other things around it. So now that this is absolutely positioned, it's like kind of in the middle of nowhere, because everything else is relatively positioned. So it gets really confusing. And you can see already how ridiculous it is to try and just get two things on the same line positioned correctly. So one of the ways you solve this is you put both of these things in a containing wrapping element. And then from within there, you tell it where you want them to go. So if I said, now I'm going to create another divider, and I'm going to call this the header. And this is going to contain all the links. So inside of the header, you're going to have both the left header links and the right header links. And now if I make the header display flex. So now I'm going to tell it, I'm going to get rid of this stuff. Oops, I actually do want the width. Now I'm saying, hey, everything inside of this heading divider here is going to be displayed using flexbox, which is how you declare that content is flexed. You can read this documentation if you want on flexbox. But yeah, so I'm going to say, hey, I want everything to be inside this flex container, and now you can see that these are now in fact on the same line. And if I say, I don't even remember what the property name is, but if I think it's align content flex end, which is the end of the, oops, nope, that wasn't it. Let's check what it is. Flex direction. This is one way to do it, but I don't really like that way, and it won't work for us correctly. Just trying to find the thing I want to use here. It's called align. Yeah, okay, align items. Align items. Flex end. All right, that's still not working. Why is that not working? Let's see what's going on here. Oh, sorry. CSS. So it's actually working. What it's doing is so I have declared, again, I don't really want to get into the details because this is super confusing and not really necessary for learning the basics of web development. But what I did was I said, hey, everything inside of this header is flexed, but I didn't say that everything inside this right header links thing is flexed. So I could do the same thing. I could say, hey, now I want everything inside there to also be flexed. And that would now align the content at the end. But what I really want is I want this to be text align right, because really what I did was that the first divider inside this header takes up 50% of the screen. The second one takes up 50% of the screen. So they come together and they're each at 50%. But one of them, I want the stuff inside that to be on the right side, which is the right header links. So now I've added the extra rule to align the content within there to the right. So now you can see that you have this master container here that covers the whole thing. And then inside of that, you have the two separate 50% widths. And now those are 50% of the total header element. So if I just to demonstrate this, if I made the header actually less wide than the screen, so if I said width, I don't know, 60%, well, I could even do pixels. So if I said like 400 pixels, now what's going to happen is that these two dividers in here are going to be 50% of 400 pixels. And you'll see that everything will move over. So now my header here is actually 400 pixels wide, and the things inside of it are 200. They're just half of that. So if I don't specify that, then it's the full width of the screen. And what's cool about Flexbox is that it flexes. So when I move, get rid of this. When I change the size of the screen, the content comes with it. So it's flexing. And Flexbox, I'll just leave it off with Flexbox is how you is one of the sorry, I lost my editor here. Flexbox is one of the techniques for aligning things in a responsive manner so that they flex with the viewport. This is one of many ways of doing alignment, but you can see right off the bat that it's not all that simple, even though like I know in my head a few ways of doing it right off the bat. If you were just doing this for the first time, you would struggle with this and you would probably feel stupid because you'd think, how hard can it possibly be to align two items on the same line? But as you can see, it's surprisingly hard or surprisingly complex. What project is this? This is not a specific project. This is just, I am starting web development from scratch, and I'm recreating just the Google homepage because it's pretty simple and kind of straightforward to do. So I'm going to continue off here. Let's do a little more styling. So you'll see that these two up here, first of all, they have a little bit of space in between them, and they're also spaced away from the outside of the browser a little bit, whereas mine are kind of packed in there. So again, we can literally look at what Google has done to see how they're like what kind of padding or what kind of spacing we have in here. And there's two types of spacing. You can either do padding or margins. They're used in different contexts, but what you can see right off the bat here is they've declared a left padding for this element to be 15 pixels. So if I put in here, if I put padding left 15 pixels, you will see that these are now separated. And they look pretty much like Google's do. They're also a little further from the top than mine, so let's see what they've done there. Oops. I have to keep resizing this because Google's page changes when I open this up. The screen changes and it actually removes some of these, so I have to keep doing this, unfortunately. But what were we doing? Right, so let's take a look at this, see why it's further down from the top. So they've got a bunch of, I don't know, placeholder elements and stuff, but it looks like they've got a margin defined here. So they've got 7 pixels at the top, 10 pixels from the left. So I can do that as well. I can say margin top 7 pixels. Right, that doesn't do anything because margins don't work with what are called inline elements, and anchors are an inline element. If I put the margin on a block element, which is a divider, actually this is Flexbox, so this won't do anything either. I could put padding top, and that would add space. So I'm not going to sit here all day and do exactly what Google did, because who knows how their styling is designed to work. But you can see they've got theirs positioned absolutely, which is kind of strange to me. Not really sure why they do that, but that's what they're doing. And they got it pushed down about 7 pixels from the top and 10 from the left, and we're about that. We're about that now, even though we achieved it with some slightly different code. So let's keep going. Let's get the Google logo centered. It looks like it's not only is it centered, but it's down the page a little bit. So if they have this wrapping divider here, which has some styling inside of it. Again, it doesn't matter to me really how they do this. I can just do it like how I want. I'm just going to look at this so I get a good idea of how far they're pushing this down. So it looks like this is some really weird, like awkward styling they've got here. But it looks like it's pushed down, that's 90, I don't know, let's say 200 pixels or something. Actually, probably not even 200. So if I wanted to do that, I'm going to call this div ID equals logo. I'm going to create a style rule here for the logo. And I'm going to say margin top 200 pixels. And hopefully this pushes the logo down. Very good. And I'm going to say, there's a bunch of different ways to center it, but if I use Flexbox, that's one of the easier ways. So display flex, and then I can say align items center. This might do it. Nope. Logo display flex, align items center. I don't remember. I don't remember the word. I don't remember the rule. There it is. The other one, justify content center. So now it's in the middle. And as it so happens, all of these things are going to be centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this up a little bit, and I'm going to say div ID equals, I don't know, main content. So I'm going to create another divider that wraps all of this stuff. And again, auto save, auto format, big win. So now I'm actually gonna change this, instead of just the logo to be there, I'm gonna move the whole thing. So now the whole thing is centered. Of course, you can see that because I haven't styled the things inside of the main content, they're just all on the same line. So we still need to add some dividers for that. And one of the quickest ways to do that is if I say flex direction column, which instead of a flex direction row is the default, where it just all flexes along rows horizontally. If I do column, then it's going to go vertically, and now everything will stack on top of each other. And the confusing part about Flexbox is that for whatever reason, when you change the direction, you have to also change the rule that, like, yeah, I don't know how to describe that. That's just a funky thing with Flexbox, where the align items and justify content are sort of interchangeable depending on the direction of your flexing. Someone who's a Flexbox expert could explain that better than me, but I just happen to know that's how it works. So what I've done is I've made this center block here into a Flexbox, which is now a column. So it goes vertically instead of horizontally. So again, if I just remove the center for a moment, and it goes back to the way it was. If I change this back to row, which is the default, now it's going to all spread out on the same line, because that's how the row flex works. But if I put column, then it stacks vertically. And if I want to center it while it's a column, I have to use the align items rule. Okay, so let's just finish up here. A few more things. So as you can see, there's some spacing, like there's lots of obvious things, like this box is much bigger and stuff, but there's some spacing we got to deal with first. So I'm not going to do this exact, but let's say that let's call this the search box divider. Let's say that the search box divider has some margins as well. So margin top, I don't know, 20 pixels, and margin bottom, 20 pixels. So I'm just saying add space above and below the text box here. So you'll see that's what that does. And everything else is actually pretty close. Let's just clean it up a little bit. One of the things you'll notice here is that everything is actually Arial. So if I want, like I've made my links Arial, but if I want everything to be Arial, the way you can do that is you can just say, globally, you can just say in my HTML body, well, I don't have to do it this way, but let's just say body. I could say font family Arial. I'll do it the same way as. So now everything becomes Arial, and I can also make it font size 13 pixels. So now everything will actually be 13 pixels Arial. So let's do a little bit about the, let's do a little bit of the search box, which is going to require some special code to get exactly, but for now I can do a few things. If I say, I want this rounded, first of all, I want to make it wider, and I want to make the border like a little lighter. I don't know what color that is, but it's like a lighter gray. So let's have a look, see what color they've used here. So they've got another RGB. And actually this is still just, black. They've just made it 87% visible. There's lots of weird ways to style things on the internet, so don't be surprised if like no two sites basically ever look the same. But I'm gonna give this input an ID, search text box, and actually I'm gonna change this to search container to be more clear. So this is gonna be search container, which has the margins, and then I'm gonna say search text box. Let's say the width is going to be, I don't know what this is, but let's just say 200 pixels to start and see where that gets us. That's not nearly wide enough. Let's say 400 pixels. All right, looks a little better. It seems to be a little higher, a little taller as well. So let's put a height in here. Let's say 30 pixels. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, that's a little better. And one of the things they also have is that the corners are round, so you can do like border radius. I don't know, 6 pixels. So now it's rounded. Again, it doesn't look the same because this is going to require quite a bit of like custom styling to get it to look like this. But you can see where I'm going here, where it's just, in the end, like you just declare your elements, you target them with some kind of identifier, and then you apply all the rules. So I could sit here all day just like adjusting these rules to look exactly like Google. That's not really what I get paid to do, or used to get paid to do, so I'm not going to do that. But I just wanted to get a feel for how different elements work and how to declare them on the page. One of the challenging things about this is that not every browser reacts the same way. So I don't know if I have a specific example of this, but if I open this same page in Internet Explorer, let's see if it looks the same. Looks pretty close. Yeah, it looks pretty close. But if you looked at this in like on your phone, this might look a little different. So one of the challenges when you're programming on the web is to look at what's coming out on all the different output screens, so all the different types of devices and stuff, all the different browsers, and try and make it look the same. And I guess we can talk about that a little later when we get into the advanced stuff. But for now, that's just one of the challenges you have to deal with. In fact, even right off the bat here, I could see that like this text box is darker than this one. And you'll notice that, well, it's subtle, but if I hover over this, it changes color. The border of the thing changes to blue. Whereas in Chrome, if I hover over it, nothing happens. I have to actually like select it for it to change color. And Internet Explorer is almost the opposite. It changes color when I hover on it, and then when I actually click into it, it goes back to black. So you can see like right off the bat, I haven't even done anything yet. I've just used like a basic element with no special styling, and it's already like pretty different between these two experiences for the user. If I was like you've all become accustomed to like links being like underlined and stuff like that, but if you get accustomed to like, hey, when I'm using a text box, it's highlighted blue. That's how I know I'm like inside a text box. In here, like it's already different. So you're getting a different experience. And this one even shows an X. Like I didn't program that. That's Microsoft when they build Internet Explorer saying, hey, we think this is what should happen in a text box. And even though there's a standard for that, defined by the Web Standards Committee, browsers can kind of do their own thing, which is, I didn't even expect to see this much of a difference, but like this is a pretty big deal. They've even added functionality here that like doesn't exist in Chrome. Like there is no X button. Like I didn't program an X button that clears this. So that's an unexpected thing. And when you're programming in the real world and you're delivering something to a client and they said they want their text box to look like this, and when you type in it, this is what it looks like. I didn't even program this to do this, and it's adding an X button here. So that would be like, that could come back from your testing department as a bug saying, hey, why is there an X button in this one and not in this one? And I'd say, I don't know. That's because the guys and girls who built Internet Explorer decided that this is a feature they wanted to put into text boxes by default. And in Chrome, they didn't do that. Now, I would expect that Chrome is using the actual standards way. I don't know for sure, but this certainly to me does not seem like a standard thing that every text box on the internet should have. So right there is one of the challenges of doing this type of programming. And even though it seems simple, like just taking something and styling it a certain way, it can be very difficult to get it right across all the different browsers, because they basically do what they want. All right, so that's like pretty close. Again, like the buttons have some nicer, like softer feel to them than these ones, which I could do, if I put button elements, I want to have some padding, they get a little, border, color, RGB 0.87. So they're actually, this is a weird thing to do. But anyways, I'll go to my lighter border, blah, blah, blah. You want to change all that stuff, you can do that. Yeah, so that's some of the stuff you can do with CSS. And CSS is the styling language of the internet. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there for today because the next stuff is a little more complicated. And we're going to touch on the third language of the web, which is called JavaScript. And that's how almost everything in today's world gets accomplished as far as interactions and stuff on the internet. So like while you're hovering over this and you've got voice activation and this nice animation here, when you hover over this, like a lot of this can be done with, well, it can be done with CSS and JavaScript, but there's no like one solution fits all. So we're going to stop there today, and we will pick it up tomorrow with some more, like organizing this code a little bit more and making it a little more like real and professional looking. All right, so thanks everyone for tuning in, and this will go up on YouTube, and we'll see you tomorrow.